Hello, everyone. Shishir Lakhani graduated in UK and moved to Canada in 1976. After a short stint as a professional in the building industry, he ventured out and found a family-run manufacturing company. After 27 years of rapid growth and much success, he sold the business and retired at an early age of 53. The entrepreneurial business life of having worn so many hats gave him solid grounding in many aspects of running and managing a fast-growing, complex business. But even more important, a deeper understanding of human nature. A lifelong learner, he now flourishes in a phrase of giving back and self-development. A distinguished Toastmaster and well-known public speaker, a past member of the board of directors at Heart and Stroke Foundation, board member and advisor to many businesses through ACE, a business advisory board. Shishir has numerous awards, including his Private Sovereign Medal from Governor General of Canada. Welcome, Shishir.
Thank you so very much, Ala, and welcome to all of you. So many faces I already know, and some new ones, which is always nice to see. First of all, let me start with a caveat. I'm no expert in peace. Like all of you, I fight with my own devils every night. With that said, the title says, what if peace breaks out? That's almost a violent statement, isn't it? Breaks out. But having said that, I will really try and say to you that not being an expert is perhaps something that I realized, because the more I learned, the more I realized how little I know. Also, as Stu knows when he plays badminton with me, I'm no longer young, not young enough to know all the answers anymore, Stu. Having said that, I will try to convey many aspects of the subject, what if peace broke out. I'll try and stay balanced in my reflections, and I'm looking to encourage a healthy and productive discussion to follow my brief talk. So I shall now begin by sharing the screen. Okay, what if peace broke out? Reflections on war, humanity, and hope. Is war ever justifiable? Most people would say no. Is it a human condition? Are we biologically made that we're always in that fear factor? Flight, fright. Is it a psychological phenomenon? Economic? Or are there social factors involved? Because wars have shaped nations, have defended freedoms many a times. Yet wars have caused immense, yes, I repeat, immense suffering and destruction. A human condition. We are always concerned about self-protection, a survival instinct. Psychologically, there's a need for power, need for domination. In life, they say, especially when I run a business, winners and losers. Darn shame. It has caused so much distress in human beings and has damaged so many. The economic factors sometimes drive into warfare, because to the winners go the spoils. Power and greed sometimes affect how governments behave, how kingdoms behave, how leaders behave. Loots and treasures. Social factors like tribal loyalties sometimes drive warfare. Sectionalizing people, nationalism, patriotism, religions, you name it. It starts drawing distinctions, the boundaries between them and us. Where does it stop? Is it me, myself, and I? Is it my family? Is it my community? Is it my country? Where do I draw that line? Robert Frost said in his poetry titled Mending Wall, good fences make good neighbors. Good fences make good neighbors. Yes, there's a lot of sense to that. Can we learn from history? Because they do say history has so much to teach us, except we forget. What lessons has humanity learned or failed to learn from past conflicts? Can we ever evolve beyond wars as a means of resolving disputes? We seem to go to that war scenario very quickly. So how can we resolve these type of conflicts? Hegel had something interesting to say. We learn from history that we do not learn from history. We learn from history that we do not learn from history. Why do we say rest in peace? Why don't we live in peace? It's so easily said, rest in peace, my friend, you're gone. Had we only not said that throughout their whole lives, wouldn't that have been so much better? Some quotes on war and peace. Benjamin Franklin, very practical, pragmatic inventor, businessman, one of the very famous founders. To be prepared for war is one of the most effectual means of preserving peace. Being prepared is basically telling the other side, we're not afraid, we will take you on if necessary. And yet Voltaire, the pessimist here, said, it is forbidden to kill, therefore all murderers are punished unless they kill in large numbers, and to the sound of trumpets. We glorify a war. Remember, these are people of their times. Peace is the ultimate goal, but is it achieved? But it has to be achieved through justice. So said Thomas Aquinas, who basically defined just wars. Bertrand Russell said, war does not determine who is right, only who is left. H.G. Wells said, if we don't end war, it will end us all. Einstein said, war has been won, now let's try and win the peace. E.M. Forster. Now he's making a feminist statement here. He's saying, I'm sure if the mothers of various nations would meet, there would be no more wars. And yet it could be challenged. It was Margaret Thatcher who went to Falklands. But was she wearing men's shoes in order to fit in and do what she did? Questions that always remain open to discussion. Norman Mailer said, any war that requires a suspension of reason as a necessity to support is a bad war. How many times we abandon reasoning, rationality, and join the gang, become sheep being led into wars. The effects of war. From preparation, all the bravado, going off to war, to the deaths, destructions, and the innocent victims. Women and children, not spared. So let's try and see what are the justifications for war. Why would we need to go to war? The just war philosophy, the theories, there has to be a cause, an intent. It has to be a last resort, and the reaction should be proportional. Self-defense, of course, a great reason for wars, because it's for survival. World War II, the Nazism. We also can see the value of justification of wars being defending freedoms and ending tyrannies, civil war in the States, slavery in the States, end of colonialism across the world. Now, my friend John told me to make sure I include this slide. It's based on the Bhagavad Gita. And the Bhagavad Gita has been written on the Hindu tradition, and it's set during a war period, the epic war of Mahabharata. It frames the war as a moral duty to fight for justice and for righteousness. The Gita arises from this conflict, exploring the ethics, the purpose, and duty in war. Defending freedom is often demands confrontation with injustice. Conflict, though tragic, reflects a universal human struggle for meaning, for the right action. So those who are not familiar with the Mahabharata, I'll give you a very brief context. It's two sets of cousins vying for the throne, the kingdom. And now they're facing each other in a battlefield. Very much like Game of Thrones, if you've seen that. The man you see on his knees is the prince. He's seen his opposition. That's his kith and kin. And he throws down his bows and arrows and he says, I cannot fight these people. They're my uncles, they're my cousins, they are my fellow blood brothers. And the person you see standing beside is the charioteer for his war. And that's Krishna giving him the values, explaining to him that this trepidation you feel is a moral and emotional dilemma all humans face, whether you face it in a war, like the one you're seeing in a picture, or you face it within, because there's a war inside all of us, trying to decipher right from wrong. How do I do, and how do I justify morally to myself what is right and what is wrong? A wonderful analogy, because when you really think about it, the Bhagavad Gita translates away from the war itself into the human way of behavior. Duty to fight for the right. Conflict is a human condition, and we all need to be prepared for it. Are there any positive consequences of war? Surprisingly, yes, there is. So much progress comes out through warfare. Inventions, technological progress, radar, jet engines came out, internet came out of it, nuclear energy, satellite, GPS, medicine, blood banks, antibiotics even. Decolonization happened after wars. National unity and identity got entrenched. Political instruments happened so that no such big war can recur. United Nations was formed, NATO, ICC, World Bank. All these things came as a result of wars. So there are some side effects, unintended consequences. Case against the war is the human cost, that of suffering. From the Civil War, Sherman, war is hell. Sartre said, when the rich wage war, it's the poor who die. Psychological traumas, PTSDs, broken families, genocides, victimized minorities, 10 million deaths, World War I, 50 million deaths, World War II. You can see the escalation. And they say World War II was a consequence of World War I. Moral and environmental damage is also so critical. So does it mean pacifism is the right answer? Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., war is never justified. But then do you become a doormat? Nonviolent resistance achieves a change. India did. US civil rights did. How about the environmental impact? Agent Orange came out of it. Oil well fires, Middle East, nuclear winter. So many things that we all need to be cognizant of. It was Gandhi who actually said, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. Isaac Asimov, an idealist, there are no nations, there's only humanity. And if we don't come to understand that right soon, there will be no nations because there will be no humanity. An African proverb, war is created by people too old to fight, or those too young to die. So case against the wars is the erosion of freedoms. Wartime governments restricts rights. World War I, World War II, we saw that. 9/11 brought in the Patriot Act. Everybody's under surveillance all the time. James Madison said, if tyranny, oppression comes in the guise of fighting a foreign enemy, they say weapons of mass distraction can, of course, be utilized to start warfare. So a balanced reflection now is Steven Pinker's book, Better Angels of Our Nature, was quite encouraging and optimistic. He says since the World War II, we've seen the most peaceful time on Earth. And you can justify it if you look at those numbers. The UN has acted up and they started to stop wars. Until recently, they had some power and teeth. They say per capita deaths due to war have declined. That may be a step in the right direction. So wars sometimes appear necessary, but always come at a cost. Can humanity resolve conflicts without war? And the supreme art of war, by Sun Tzu, says, subdue the enemy without fighting. Mr. Franklin again, life's tragedy is that we get too old too soon and wise too late. So in summary, war justification is complex and deeply subjective. There is power dynamics, perceptions, and they shape what just causes and how do we define just causes for wars. That fog of war obscures the truth. Accountability is mired in double standards, helped and aided, abetted by media. Each side sees its own point of view, whereas one sees a 6, the other sees a 9. In closing, would it not be nice if peace were to actually break out? May peace be our default, not our dream. Before I conclude, I just want to say thank you to all of you for bearing with me on this. And this is not meant to point fingers or decide what's right, what's wrong. It is something for us to do some introspection on. We've shared some memorable moments. I'm hoping this will create some interesting dialogues and discussions. They should be healthy, productive, and definitely not adversarial. Thank you. Henry, my friend from Costa Rica.
Yes, and while listening this, I came to one interesting, in my opinion, question came to my mind. First, I start from the question: are human beings are inherently good or evil? That's the first thing. So I can answer this question for myself. I would say both. And if you take into account the devices that we possess, because as the saying goes, any saint has a little corner of hell in his soul, and then any bad person has a little corner of paradise. So I would say, the question is, don't you think that the real reason of the wars, there are multiple reasons, obviously, but I would see the main reason as the human nature, human vices, because people cannot live in peace. And as saying goes, the long peace creates the generation of people, and the survival instinct disappears. So when this instinct disappears, it's called degeneracy. And we can observe it easily, especially in the West. So my question is, Shashir, do you think that this is the main reason, the human vices, what causes the war? What's your opinion?
Henry, that's a great question. Are humans good or bad? It's perception of how we look at things, half full, half empty. So many times the decisions we make in life are based upon what we consider it from our point of view, and we're quite jaded as human race because of this flight fright response I mentioned. We're always afraid of our survival mentality kicks in, hoping that nobody's going to be attacking us. If that's the basis of how we behave usually, we are automatically prone to be ready for a fight. How can we see the good in others when we're too busy trying to protect ourselves? And a good yoga teacher of mine once told me there are two very important emotions you need to be aware of. And number one is fear, and the other one is love. And as you very rightly put it, Henry, both have a place in our hearts. It's a question of which wolf are you feeding? John Moniz.
Yeah, hi, Shishir. That was very, very nice. Great. And I am just wondering, if we stop wars, how on earth are we going to take what doesn't belong to us?
So John is asking, how are we going to steal if there is no wars?
Yeah.
That's a direct, blunt question, of course. I expected no less from you.
I guess greed has a lot to do with it.
Indeed, indeed. But possession, that property that we think we own, and we want more and more of it, when do we stop? I say to many business audiences, I had a great balance sheet. What I was lacking was a good balance in life. And that greed continues to drive people. I advise business and sit on boards where an 80-year-old and still can hardly stand up, but still wants to buy a new company. Why? Because I need to make more money. And that greed that you talk about, there was a wonderful shamanic expression about property should be like air, belongs to everybody. We shouldn't be bouldering things up. But that greed that you mentioned certainly is a human factor that continues to pull us in that direction. Maybe we should stop stealing, guys. Thanks, John. Victoria.
Hi, Shishir. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I missed a little bit of it because I got disconnected all of a sudden. But anyway, I think I caught the most important parts. I have actually read Steven Pinker's book where he argues that the violence is receding and that we're actually living in this golden age. However, my problem with this was, okay, so he's citing, quoting statistics and data showing that there's less people dying, there's fewer wars happening. However, well, the statistics it's a funny thing, right? It's kind of like, well, who was calculating 1,000 years ago? We didn't have those spreadsheets and graphs and charts to show, and nobody was actually counting how many people were dying at that time, right? So, and then considering the scale of the wars that we humans can run right now as compared to the past, right? In the past, they just had manual weapons of war. Now you can press the button and kill thousands with just one button, right? So it's kind of like I was reading it, and I like Steven Pinker because I think he's very bright and educated. But at the same time, I was like, yes, but. So you're making this nice argument for North America, by the way, right? It's not for the rest of the world, maybe, because nobody is making statistics for the rest of the world. Again, and if they are making statistics, it's probably kind of skewed because it's not everything, right? Yeah. So statistics is a funny thing. I don't know where we're going with this because it looks like the humanity cannot live without wars by nature. So I don't know. My point of view would be some kind of a utopic scenario where like you have this kind of injection where nobody gets violent anymore. There are movies like this, right? 1984, and there are books like this. But I don't know if this is going to make us less human. And the other scenario I would be thinking is if we put AI at the government reign, so to say, maybe AI is going to be just and distribute all the property equally. So what do you think?
Interesting comments, Victoria. You're challenging the statistics. Of course, statistics can be molded whichever way you want. I think it was Disraeli who said, there's lies, there's more lies, and there's, of course, statistics.
Yeah.
But statistics can certainly be molded in however you spin it. For instance, you could say, did you know, Victoria, that half the people in this world are below average? Well, that really gets us all realizing how foolish statistics can become if manipulated. But having said that, I had a school teacher when I was in my junior school who said, there is 1.5 to 2 billion people in this world. There's not enough food. We're all going to starve. Well, we've proven that wrong. So, it's certainly showing us in the big trajectory. And they say, it's not one point that makes a data. It is several points. And it's the trend that measures the diminishing of the deaths due to warfare. And we've enjoyed some real peaceful times since the Second World War. We may be facing more difficult times ahead. We don't know. But having said that, I certainly agree with your point on statistics. They are malleable and they can be utilized incorrectly. The AI suggestion, well, from your words, I hope something turns out good from that. But we've got to see. It is a double-edged coin. Thank you, Victoria. Tori, how goes in the west side of the country?
Well, it's still light out here. The darkness hasn't descended yet, but I know it's coming. No, it was a wonderful presentation, Shishir. I really enjoyed it, and I liked all of it. But I thought particularly it was good to mention the Bhagavad Gita and the duty of war, as ironic as that may sound, or horrific as that may sound. Just a couple of points, sort of random points I'd like to just say. And that is another couple of points that you made was if women ruled the world, there wouldn't be any wars. I like that thought, and I appreciate more and more women in leadership, particularly in the West, but I mean in the East as well. Japan has a new female prime minister. Mexico has a new female prime minister. That's a real interesting development. But also your talk about, again, sort of the Vedic, or I'd say the Eastern wisdom of the Vedas, Buddha, Zen Buddhism, and even Chinese culture, which had been traditionally very inward focused and not imperialistic. There's obviously wars in the East, but a potentially more pacifist and simple, a Zen lifestyle, and is something that keeps people from being aggressive. And your point about greed reminds me of one of my favorite sayings. It's just, you don't own property, property owns you. And being more simplistic lifestyle, and not so greedy, not so highly consumptive of energy and material, obviously would have a good effect on the planet's biosphere, but also would have a good political effect in keeping people less warlike. So I just want to say those a more feminine stance and a more simplified lifestyle, and a lifestyle. I always think of particularly the Hindu saints who lived utterly simplistically and were not aggressive, and in that state could still be highly in a blissful state. So I think it's possible that we can be that way. And as far as Steven Pinker goes, just since that was brought up, it's funny how so many, there were 100 years of peace after the Napoleonic Wars, and people thought, right up to the very beginning of August 1914, that it's stupid. War is irrational. We have a perfect civilization, and sure enough, and that went away. And then even in our era, Thomas Friedman writes the world is flat, or Steven Pinker says, this is the greatest period of life, and yet we're still on the verge of, a global war. So it's never wise to think that just because life is so good that we've gotten away from war. So just anyway, those are some of the thoughts that I have. So I really appreciate the talk you gave.
Thank you so very much, Tori. You're always very encouraging. I appreciate that. Having said that, you talk about women in power and how they may differ from men in power. It's a very complex subject because women in power have come around due to the fact that they were there by accident. I watched a documentary on Angela Merkel the other day. And somebody coming from East Germany, ruling the United Germany, and then being such an important person in the EU, subjected to her fears when she went and traveled to Moscow, realizing that she was afraid of dogs. Yeah. Guess what they bring into the room?
Yeah.
Big black Doberman, and park him right next to her. This is the male testosterone-driven culture that really affects so many women, and they consider women as properties. And unfortunately, that still is not leaving us. Despite all the advances that we see happening, maybe they could run things better. In the boardrooms, I sit in many boardrooms, and who's the loudest speakers? Of course, you know where the testosterone is. You know who's going to be the one who's going to lead the group discussion and how decisions will be driven. So when, I think Margaret Thatcher said something quite profound. She actually said, do you want anything said? Get a man. You want anything done? Get a woman. So maybe she was onto something. Thank you, Tori, for your contribution. Ted Kennedy.
Oh, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, good. Okay.
You're a little soft.
A little soft. The microphone a little bit closer.
Thank you.
So two things, well, not two things in general, but two things came to mind just in terms of references as to why war. And I was reminded while you were talking about Frank Herbert, the author. You've probably heard of him. And his idea was that it was ultimately a genetic imperative where it was a desire of the species itself to jumble up the gene pool every once in a while and basically just go to war. Another idea is that it's a way of sweeping up underemployed and underutilized young men and getting rid of them as a way of just simply disposing of a population that they've got some examples of the Taiping Rebellion. I think they just had a shortage of females and just way too many males and giant civil war. So those are only like two ideas. The Frank Herbert one is a completely fictional one. There's absolutely no proof of that. And it's a generalization to say that it's because of an excess male population. It's just there appear to be dozens and dozens of reasons to go to war, and all of them seem to individually have some type of internal logic that is hard to argue with.
Hood Road, then turn right onto Hood Road.
John Cummins, please turn off.
I will.
I wouldn't turn right onto that road, by the way.
Right onto Hood Road.
It's Hood Road. It sounds dangerous. So.
Bad neighborhood.
Okay. So I guess I'm just saying is that.
Sorry, Ted. Ronan, can you mute John Cummins?
Thought I was.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, Ted, carry on.
Yeah, so I just say I don't think there's any one reason for it, but there are always reasons, and those reasons always appear to make sense to somebody. And it's certainly it probably doesn't make much sense to the person who's on the victim side of the war. Person who's taking it on, it appears to have some type of rationale, up to the point that it's deeply embedded in all major philosophies. I mean, Sun Tzu and his books and the ideas of the purpose of war is to do it as quickly as possible, and what's the Latin phrase? I think I've got it on my screen here. The classic Latin phrase, "Si vis pacem parabellum," if you want peace, prepare for war. That idea that you just simply can't avoid it. So when you've got peace, you should be preparing for the worst. It's it feels to me like it's an unavoidable thing. But like you said, I think Tori, you mentioned 100 years go by and people kind of forget, and then it just seems to happen again, and then eventually people forget.
Well, thank you so much, Ted. You made a few wonderful points there. First and foremost, is the side benefit of wars that it cleans up the gene pool? Is the benefit of war that it clears out population so there's more room for others? I find it as repulsive as it is to say maybe eugenics had a point. So I personally think that may be an unintended consequence, and certainly hope it was not a meant consequence of starting wars. The other thing you mentioned was the fact that Sun Tzu and say prepare for war, sometimes the deterrence is so important. If it hadn't been for the nuclear bombs, could we have had this peace for the last 50, 60 years? Who knows? Minor warfare has become very minor compared to the millions that died in the First and the Second Wars. But warfare is always there, sometimes triggered by the us, them, demonized minorities, or dehumanized before the attacks begin. Sometimes for very different reasons. Sometimes it's, for example, I was born in Africa, and I know what's going on in Africa. It's a looting period. There's so much resources there, so they keep the governments destabilized all the time. So while they're destabilized, money is being made. So the economic warfare is going on under the guise of separating different types of people, us, them. You could use religion, you could use tribes, you could call it whatever. But this unfortunate part, human nature, sometimes the negative sides overtakes the kind, compassionate, and the empathetic kind.
It's just another example of another variation on it, the economics of redistributing wealth that way. That's what happens when governments have been overthrown. But there's also the arms industry itself, which thrives on the creation of the product. And the only way to renew the industry is to have some of that product destroyed. So there's an economic method on both sides of the equation, which there is a significant, group of businesses, organizations, and people that profit from that as well. It's just another reason for war as profit. None of them are good reasons, and I'm not suggesting any of that. It's just there are always reasons, and they always seem to make sense to somebody. And that's, I guess, what I see as the fundamental problem is that it's always going to make sense to somebody, which means we're just never going to be free of it.
And looking at it in the business perspective, the economic perspective, so many times we are very slow to change. We hate changes. We detest changes. So what happens? Changes sometimes bring about a lot of good, but we don't allow it because we are too entrenched in the ways we've always been doing it. So many companies have actually overhauled, and this is how the new economy came in. They destabilized the brick and mortar and came out showing that there are better ways to happen. And maybe some of the wars have triggered such movements where things have actually improved after the wars. Well put, Dad. Thank you. Henry.
I just observing the human history, I can't avoid coming to the conclusion that the war is a natural human trait. Because if you look at the history from the very beginning, okay, I give a couple of examples. Indian tribes, North American Indians, there's always tribal war between them. Why? We don't know, but they had all reason. There's always we can find the reason. It's not a big deal. It's very easy to find the reason. Jesus said, "Love your enemy." All right, and the church was supposed to promote the teachings of Jesus. Didn't follow this advice. Church always hated their enemies. And so if you go further into the history, you will look at the Roman Empire, we'll look at the Persian Empire, and then etc., etc., etc. There are always war. If you look at the European states, there's always war. Well, after the Second World War, there was a United States as a pacifier. If not, I don't know what would happen to the European countries. Even today's situation, I don't want to go into it, but there are wars. So I just can't avoid thinking that this is indeed built in the human nature, the war, and there's always a reason. Reason is not a big deal because it's all relative. The perception, as you said, the perception is always there. We can perceive the other people, a different country, as wrong, as enemies, as evil, wrong ideology, etc., etc. It's very easy. United States brings democracy, destroying the country. It's a good example. And India has been destroyed by Brits. Another example, because they had their own perception in this case. So it's very difficult to find the common reason for all wars other than really the human nature.
So Henry, you're basically reinforcing what I said, that there is two sides to everything, and the side to go into warfare seems to be a very pronounced thing in human behavior traits. Let's examine, how do we decide when to go to war? Sometimes it's possession, property, anything that gives me power over somebody else becomes a distinct line, whether it's done nationally, tribally, or family-wise. There is always hierarchies, and these hierarchies are little wars going on within our own surroundings. So certainly agree with you, it is part and parcel of human nature, but would it not be nice if we didn't make that our default and make the other side of our coin, the love side, our default?
Right. And
but
another thing
Henry,
is,
I may be being idealistic there.
A little bit, in my opinion. But another thing is, there are always people who are eager to gain power. While gaining power, I'm not going to the psychological profile and etc., etc. But gaining power, they can use their power, and they do. And they can be one of the main causes of the war, because they usually, they don't participate, they don't die. Other people die. And this might be the goal. So it's just one of the things that...
Andrew, I've heard it said that while kings play chess, pawns lay dying on the fields. Only thing they forget is the fact that at the end of the game, the kings and the pawns are going to be put in the same box.
Right, but the problem is that human beings are so malleable. Malleable. It's very easy. It's very easy to brainwash them and send to war. And then they're going to die. God knows for what, because they believe in something that's been instilled in their minds.
Yes.
And here we go, we have it.
Well, it makes you wonder, do we give medals for people who we sent off to wars in the hope of appeasing our own guilt? I don't know. I don't know the answer, but it's certainly a good point. Howard.
Hi. Yeah, I understand the prevalence of violence and war, but I think I'll go back to, maybe Henry's original point that people are both good and evil, or there's a tendency towards violence, but there's also a tendency towards cooperation, building together, collective constructive action. It may not get as much attention as the violent outbreaks, but I think in sort of everyday life, there's still a lot of cooperation, whether it's commerce for economic purposes or social stuff. So I think there are these fundamental elements of human nature, and some of the nastier stuff we've transcended through philosophy, through education, just through human development. So I think a lot of that, the prevalence of violence in any given time, might have to do with what systems and structures are in place, and what structures the structures in which people live, and the value systems that are valorized by society. And I was thinking too about sort of the causes, and I'm seeing. I mean, there's a presumption, a sort of rationalistic moral philosophy that if we apply reason, we can think our way out of a propensity for violence. But then I'm thinking there's a lot of sort of predatory and practical violence that is reason based, whether it's sort of greed, and then we want to maximize profits by taking these, by getting these minerals out in the cheapest conditions possible, and we don't care about the ecology or the health of the people. So there is a kind of rationalism that is indifferent to ethics, right? So reason in itself isn't the answer, and I think to a sort of ideology and grand utopian schemes that are, driven presumably by reason, and we can see how easily those excesses, can be, vile and cruel and pernicious. So I'm thinking, part of the trend in Western ethics looks at moral sympathy and empathy as the counters to violence. So reason can be instrumental and brutal, but it's our ability to imagine other people, and maybe interact with other people that we typically don't, and see a commonality that can provide a way out. And maybe that ties in some ways to the feminization of power structures, whereby the instinct to dominance might be less naturally pronounced or something. So I guess there's violence that's just there's violence based on greed that's justified and instrumentalized through reason, and then there seems to be a whole other sort of seething underbelly of subconsciousness or unconsciousness that rise to the surface, whether it's the desire to dominate, or revenge for humiliation, or all the sort of psychological stuff that, in addition to the side of sort of that pragmatic violence, it seems to be another source of violence and war. And I'm not quite sure what the way out is, but I'm thinking fundamentally of systems and structures that allow people to live with basic comfort and dignity, and empathy and understanding. So there might be, I think Henry's right, there's probably this kernel within us, that atavistic, that's easily triggered and easily manipulated. But I think there are so many other countervailing forces that we live with every single day, and maybe they're not as pronounced because in the news we hear about the murders, but we don't hear about the people who are helping each other in dire situations. So I'm just offering sort of a counterbalance to the proposition that we're fundamentally evil or violent. That's what I guess.
Thank you, Howard. I think you should write a book on this. It's really a balance that we need to be aware of. There's two sides to everybody, and we tend to kind of focus on one or the other, and realize that within us lies both sides. Man likes to count his troubles. Rarely, very rarely, will he actually calculate his joys and his happiness. We don't live there. We live in the fear factor. We live in the areas where we count our troubles. Whenever you meet somebody, how are you? Oh my goodness, you have no idea what I'm going through. How many times has somebody said, I'm happy, I'm glad I woke up this morning. Actually, I had a good night's rest. Those things are not said. We only count our troubles. And that is the negative bias that we have to contend with, that empathy that you mentioned, the dignity that you mentioned, Howard. Where is the dignity in a dead body?
Mm-hmm.
Just been killed.
And I'm thinking about just a culture of acquisitiveness too, where we're dissatisfied with what we have because, we're always presented with the opportunity that will be more fulfilled by having more. And so there's those social structures and,
Yeah, there is no dignity. There is no dignity to be found when you see your bodies lying on the warfield. That's unfortunate. So let's break ourselves in thinking more gratitude instead of more worries. More we encounter and stay in that mindset of gratitude, perhaps that introspection might turn us into far better beings than the ones that we kind of encounter on a day-to-day basis. I have not had a chance to meet Anudeep until now. Welcome, my friend.
Yes, that's true, Shishir. Actually, this is my first session, and I feel like privileged to, be able to hear all this opinion and, interaction in general. And I always thought of, in a lighter way, philosophy is all about asking the right questions. And if you do, you'll probably find the answers. And I felt like the whole session was all about. I really enjoyed the session in the sense that there were many thought-provoking questions here, and the the topic itself was really intriguing for me because I have always tried to see the world in um, like a world in the sense that I always seen the world in the rose tinted glasses. I've tried to and failed in a way that the experiences I've had taught me again and again that not everyone is good. Like the world out there is not how I perceive it, and and the odd reality I lived in was my father was in the forces, so I've seen him being a part of war, and I never felt that to be like totally justified. But at the same time, I had this patriotic thing for the whole, the pride that my father was in the forces. So that was like two different opposing ideas always been going on in my head. And so, yeah, thank you so much, Shishir, for presenting all that. And I want to thank Ala as well to provide me that opportunity to be a part of the group. And like to begin with, I just wanted to share some of the things, and I felt that I wish there was another, like just like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I believe like there should be another hierarchy of consciousness, and I believe like as you move up uh, that ladder, you eventually reach the point where you would not do the us and them, or you move to a point where you do not see war as a means to resolve conflicts. Okay, and I did feel that capitalism, or the point where you mentioned that us and them, that's probably the essential driving force, and the divide pro- pro- maybe the divide actually results in the more wars or um, things happening. And the only thought that popped up in my head was there was this book. It was the audiobook because our original book was like really long, so I haven't read it, but I would definitely spend time on it. It was by August Huxley. It's an old book, Brave New World, and there was this line mentioned in that which says that spending is better than mending, and this is probably the philosophy of capitalism, and it's been driving us to probably just in the search of something that we can find and will complete our lives. So nobody in this current era is just thinking about less is more, like settling up for fewer things, and it's probably I feel like that's probably triggering this whole thing and of war in general. So my question, the question that came to my head when I was listening to all this discussion was for about this topic is that what will trigger the the piece to break out, like what can actually trigger the piece to break out, because I always felt like it should break out when, but what will make that happen. So then I always like my answer for that was like I would definitely like to know what you think about it, and my answer to that was that probably we would reach a point of saturation, and a lot of people did touch upon that. I think it was that the AI thing we were talking about, that also kind of got me thinking. So I was this that the point of saturation or the burnout from the inability to find satisfaction or satiation from trying to find something that completes us, and people are always behind that, the war or anything is all about gaining more power, us and them, and all of that. So yeah, I mean these were my thoughts. I know I'm not really good at kind of assimilating all my thoughts, but I just wanted to know what you feel about what can trigger that piece to break out. Thank you so much.
Anudeep, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome. This is a great group. You're going to enjoy it.
Yes, I am already. Thank you.
You're young enough to know all the answers, but you're claiming not to know them. I really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you for saying that. It's, I mean,
Said,
like, yeah, I mean that's how we should always remain. I think the point where we feel that we know the answers is when we will probably know nothing. We definitely know nothing at all. Yeah.
Agreed. When you know all the answers, you know where you are. But you're done. lifelong learner. That's what we need to be.
Yes.
Talked about making sure that, first of all, I'm happy that you have managed to think through the sides of yourself, your own equation, as to where do I belong? Is this the patriotism that drives me? Or is it the fact that why do people even need to go to wars? And when do we find a way out of it? Good questions. And as you very rightly said, it's the questions that are sometimes more important than the answers. It's being able to question some of the basics that we take for granted and say why. That are the reasons why development happens, wisdom happens. So you have a lot of it, my friend, for being that young. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
John Smithon.
Yeah, thank you
Greetings,
very much.
my friend.
Greetings to you. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the presentation, which is very stimulating. And above all, for the expert way in which you've discussed, you've conducted this discussion. For example, in your recent exchange with Andeep, who's a young man, and therefore has kind of more promise or more future, if you like, than some of us old geezers on here. Now, I have three things that I would like to get your reaction to, if I can trespass on your time enough.
Okay.
Now, Alamachenko was not going to like that. But one thing I've discovered in the last 7 or 8 years is that sometimes it's necessary to overcome one's fundamental fear of Alamachenko and do what you want to do anyway. The three things, I'll just list them first. First of all, I was very pleased that you mentioned the Bhagavad Gita, as you called it, which I'm, accustomed actually to call the Bhagavad Gita. Sometimes that occurs. So that's one thing I just want to take up, and we'll go through that in a minute. Secondly, which hasn't come up yet so far, you also did obliquely make reference to the Ten Commandments in the Christian and Jewish tradition. That was when you quoted Voltaire, about thou shalt not kill. So that's the second thing I would like to take up. The third thing is to push back briefly on some of the various comments that people have made. That'll be very brief. I've just mentioned two, just to provide food for thought. So first of all, Bhagavad Gita, it's here. I don't know if you remember that you and I were together when I purchased this book.
I remember.
We were in a second-hand bookstore somewhere, and we were even having this conversation. And lo and behold, it was on the shelves, and I just bought it. And it would be an exaggeration to say it's with me always, but it's certainly in this room.
Before he goes too far, he didn't pay the full price.
No, I didn't pay the full price. I think I paid $4 for it, and it did very well worth it, I have to say. Okay, so if I can just briefly paraphrase, what you were saying about that, it was to the effect that, the incident with Krishna and the chariot and so forth. And the solution essentially was this. The solution essentially was, well, these battles don't matter anyway, in some sense, because, reality is not, they're not really real. And we can sort of, somehow not worry about that. But anyway, you'd have to do your duty, even though it's not real, and sort of go through the battle and fight for your side. Am I right? That's a good paraphrase of the solution.
Well, if I can answer that before you go to your number two.
Well, actually, I've still got more on this, but yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Is that a reasonable solution? The thing that interested me about that was that if you take the other polytheistic religions in the Indo-European tradition, for example, the Greeks, for example, the Nordic peoples, they don't seem to have that notion that it's all not real, right? They're okay with the battle, actually. In the Greek and the Nordic traditions, they're fine with it. Valor is a good thing, and so on and so forth. What I'm curious with, after all, remember, it's the same cultural tradition, fundamentally. Sanskrit is an Indo-European language. So what's interesting is, where did that extra idealist feature, if you want to put it that way, come in the Hindu tradition? So that's the first. Yes. So that's it. So do you want to deal with that and then move on to the other things?
Sure. So John is asking us, in the Hindu tradition, as is in Buddhism, there's a question of what is real. And where is the reality? Is this reality we are seeing our perception, or is it a material thing that's over here and it stays there after we are gone? And the fact that this matter of death that faces all of us is the basis and roots of all religions. It has been answered, you go to hell, you go to heaven. It has been answered, you'll be reincarnated. We're still waiting for the next Lama to come along. These kind of things about reincarnation have all been an answer to death, in my opinion, my humble opinion. Realistically, what we are saying, and what Gita is saying, is the fact that whatever the reason, you have to fight in this life. If you don't manage to live through it, remember you have another life waiting for you. And that gives you an out. It gives you a reason to believe, well, in case I was to go away, that's okay. Next time I'll have a higher birth. I may be born a better caste, for goodness sake. This kind of things give you hope. And that is unfortunately given in all religions where they have afterlife. So that's my question in terms of reality and perception. The Gita did go into the reincarnation, whereas the Greek gods didn't. But remember, all gods were supernatural, really natural powers. Sun, wind, these are all considered powers. And even if you look at the natives of North America, they were very much into the nature. And if we don't revere nature as being part and parcel of all of us, because remember, we will be dust to dust. So that was my answer on the side of reality.
Yes. Yeah. So as far as the, when you quoted Voltaire, it was something along the lines that, we're commanded, not to kill, but it's all right if we do it in
warfare.
Or that brings me precisely to the Ten Commandments. And Ronan and I did like a series on this a couple of years ago, which was somewhat similar. And very much to my surprise, I discovered that in the King James version of the Bible, the commandment literally is, "Thou shalt not kill." And Ronan confirmed to me, and Ronan may want to come in on this, that it's actually somewhat similar in the original Aramaic or whatever language it was. Thou shalt not kill, a blanket, thou shalt not kill. And I'm not a huge biblical scholar, but I was actually shocked by this when I looked it up. It says there in black and white, thou shalt not kill. I'd always assumed that the commandment was, without, following it, thou shalt not murder. You see, so what you were doing is you were setting up like, killing is not fundamentally, illegitimate. Murder is illegitimate, but there is some killing, perhaps in war, wherever, where it's okay. So I just want to get your thoughts on that. I was always assuming that the commandment was "Thou shalt not commit murder." It is not, in fact. It's "Thou shalt not kill," which does seem to bring in this kind of like fundamental pacifist thing. And I would like
I'm going to take a stab at it, John. I'm not an expert on Bible, but I do know it has been written and rewritten several times and amended because, as you and I know, values of past no longer can be held to no fault now. What was good 100 years ago is no longer good. Slavery was fine in the Bible.
Yeah.
Thou shalt not kill was perhaps written at that time, perhaps written at a later time. I don't know the history of it, but the fact that it suggests that it is not good to kill, I think is a great point. And I think we all are talking about peace, and that is what peace really rests upon. You should not be killing. So I completely agree with the statement. However, it was Thomas Aquinas who said there is a reason for just wars. And just wars can be justified if there is good enough reason. And there are causes, intents, and so on. So, yeah, that's really a great point about the Ten Commandments.
Ronan, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting idea that there's a distinction between murder and killing. The notion that we ought to really honor all life is a fundamental idea that is in the Bible, despite the fact that there's a lot of conflict in the Bible as well. But I was thinking, what came to my mind is a psychological idea by Sigmund Freud, where he talks about the death instinct, the fact that, psychologically, he argues, and I'm not sure I agree with him, but he argues that there's this innate unconscious drive that we have towards destruction. And it's contrary to the life instinct. And war, as I understand it, for him is really a way of expressing some deep psychological impulses that we all possess. And in fact, war becomes a way of essentially giving permission for society to abnegate ethical responsibility. So, because there's no one person who's fighting a war, it's a collective endeavor. It is essentially war is essentially a permission that's being given to that death instinct to become manifest in the world. Now, I think he also suggests that this death instinct is related to the id, that impulse, that is that primal impulse that we all have. I think what the Bible, though, is arguing is that this is something that we need to control. That killing is an abnegation of our humanity. So while we have inner conflict and we have this impulse to destruction, it's our responsibility, our ethical responsibility, to control that. But it's also interesting to me. You talk about war, but it's to me, when I think of Hollywood, and how destruction is glorified in Hollywood. Mass destruction, cars, burning and people dying, and it's all done in good fun. I mean, I'm using quotation marks here. I think what it really manifests is Freud's death instinct. It's a safe way of actually expressing it. But my point is, it's all related to this question of war and why we go to war, and where does it come from? I recall too that in World War I, young men were eager to go to war. It was deemed as it was seen as a celebration. It was a celebration. We're going to go out and have an adventure, right? So conflict seems to be just a fundamental part of what it means to be a human being.
Yeah.
Good point, Ronald. Yeah. And I think you expressed it very well. I just hoped and prayed that you wouldn't say Freud's name in there, because he also had a lot of instincts about sex and how that drives everybody mad.
Sure, I promise I will not say the word Freud again.
Okay.
Yeah. And my two, sort of pushbacks on what other people are saying. I think someone said something, and this just may give more food for people to jump in and have their say. It was mentioned something to the effect that that if there were more women in politics or whatever, there would be less war. Now, I don't know how familiar you guys are with the politics of the European Union, but I just need to mention two names, which I think negates that thesis: Ursula von der Leyen and Kaja Kallas. I just mentioned those names. The second pushback is, again, the question of Buddhism came up, and Buddhism is like meditation and all that kind of thing, and peace and harmony and that kind of thing. Well, it so happens that my stepdaughter actually is an ordained Buddhist nun, and has been for a number of years, and I spend a lot of time at their temple, and I've been to the teachings, and I'm quite familiar with them. I just would remark that, and with no disparagement to anybody, that the internal politics of that organization are exactly the same as you have in the Royal Canadian Legion, exactly the same as you have in the Aurora, Philosophy Institute, and exactly the same as in any You know, and I don't know what the meaning of that is, but it's the case. Anyway, thank you for indulging me.
Thank you, John. And I completely agree. Organized religion is run like a business.
Yeah.
Very, very often. And
Yeah.
that, of course, answers most of these questions. As regards to Hollywood glorifying it, yes, that was done so much. And then, as you noticed, after the Vietnam War, it began to be de-glorified in various movies. So I think there was a change in the values of the society to see that there is another side to the equation. Thank you very much, both of you. Great contribution. Henry.
Sorry, me again. I just, since this is a philosophy club, I would like to make a parallel. Some people may find it exaggerated or may disagree, but the parallel with the idealism, beginning from Immanuel Kant and then Schopenhauer. So the idea is the idea. Our perception, we see things and not just things as an idea, as things are not things as they are, but our opinion in our interpretation of things is based on our perception, because we don't know what the reality is. But the perception can be constructed, can be influenced, can be modified, can be created. So this is why I personally use the parallel with idealism, because it's not just things, it's people, it's nations, tribes that can be then when the philosophy can be applied to. The idea that, for example, this particular group of people is bad. We have a perception. This is our idea. The idea can be instilled in our mind, not necessarily we create it. There are some forces that can, I would say, brainwash or affect us. And therefore, here we go. We have a pretext, we have an idea, we have a perception. And I believe that Schopenhauer in particular was very right about it. We live in the world of ideas. And this world of ideas basically is a driving force of the wars, of the conflicts. Because since we create the idea and then our brain is focused on this idea, and only there are some strong, significant events can change it. Otherwise, we just follow this idea of perception and act upon it. So this is how I see the parallel with the idealism, with this philosophy.
Thank you so much, Henry. I think that's really so true. We may see the same thing, and you'll see it different than I do. Why? Because our perception varies. Anaïs Nin said, we don't see things as they are, but as we are. And if it's within us as to the perception, then the question is it free will, or was it really something that we grew up with? And was it the nurturing? And was it something that John Smith said to me last time I met with him? Or Tori? We are all affected by everything we see and hear and observe. So consequently, our perceptions are also very variable, depending on where we are, at which stage in life, and what our
if you look at it, if you look at it deeper, that basically this is the main reason. This is the main cause of conflict, because the perception is being built, and this and instilled in the mass brain, and then people usually tend to think as the rest, because individual thinking is rare and mostly persecuted. So and then it's much easier. It's much easier to think and act as a mob, as a crowd, and it's much safer. Here we go. We got the perfect environment to start a war.
So if Henry, we take that one step further and say if perception is what really dictates our behavior, then our perception can be manipulated with dis and misinformation. And we get plenty of that through the media and through everybody else as to how we should be thinking. And that perception now has got a bias built in. Bias not even from ourselves, but from outside.
And it's not just media, it's also education, and then what we call the indoctrination, education, whatever you call it, when they teach students what to think, not how to think, but what to think. And
wonderful quote comes to mind.
Mhm.
History is written by the hunter, not by the lion.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you, Henry. Well said. Tori, are we doing
Right.
okay on time, Ala? Ronan, are we okay on time?
Yeah, I think we
Yes,
have
we are. Yes.
a couple more minutes, maybe a couple more questions.
Okay,
We
thank
have
you.
Shishir, we have one comment from John Cummins in a chat if you want to address that, and we can after Tori, of course.
Oh, he's written a whole book here.
That was funny. Some people like to speak, some people like to read, some people like to fight. Yes.
Okay.
Here we go.
So let me read that while Tori,
yeah.
Tori, it's your turn while I read this.
Okay, I'll just make a comment on the part about objectivity and realism, but as a preface to what I really want to comment on is just maybe a little bit of a summary of a lot of the comments so far. But as far as the whole question about realism and subjectivity and perception, there is no, it's gotten very confused in our modern era, I think. And, there is no, we equate being real with objectivity in our perceptions, but there is no objectivity. It's an intersubjective collection of people trying to figure out what the reality is, what the objective reality is. So perception, fantasy, and just power relations are what drive social events. And the idea that there's some realism or realistic objective reality that we're trying to hone in on, we'll never get there. It's always a lot of individual perceptions trying to find that. But one of the things that I think we haven't mentioned is the economics dimension of particularly the event of modern money being created in the human civilization, world civilization, and how that's affected the propensity to go to war and intertribal violence at a global scale. So remembering that we have a different kind of money today than we did, say, before 1500, thanks to particularly the Italians who invented banking, which allowed a lot more things to be done than when we had a very strictly material-oriented coinage, like gold coins or metallic coins. And so, it took a while, of several centuries, before we really exploited that capacity to do sort of more than just trade and commerce, but we actually could start investing into industrial production and enterprise type of activity. So, but one of the first things that resulted from banking and the modern money was the creation of standing armies, because before, which happened in the 1600s, particularly in the advanced countries at that time, particularly Britain and say the Dutch, where now they could raise a lot of money through a banking network, independently of how much gold they had, and attack other countries and take over things. Louis XIV, the King of France, said, the British were, good warriors, but the real truth of the matter was that he was defeated because they had a long purse. They were not only long in the sword, but they were long in the purse. They could finance expeditionary forces overseas. And then the Industrial Revolution was another new thing that came along, and with science, they could start doing all these incredible things, but they required large-scale hierarchical power structures to get things done. And then in the 20th century, we had so much science and so many specialized instruments. We could create weapons that of mass destruction, like the atomic bomb and the hydrogen bomb, and everybody thought, oh, well, this is going to be the weapon that stops all war. We can't have any war after this, and we're still trying to figure that out. I think the conclusion about this is to think that we need to democratize money-based enterprises and activities. In other words, socialism. Socialism, not in the sense of the Soviet Union, communism, where everybody, it's a dictatorship of the proletariat. Everybody owns. There's no private property. That's not socialism. Socialism is like, independent farmers joining to be a cooperative, or independent citizens having money in a credit union. In other words, not having one share membership of a particular activity. You don't have IPOs, initial public offerings. You don't have stock exchanges. You have socially owned and democratically governed enterprises. So I would say that's not going to keep us from going to war, but that one of the reasons why war is so possible is that we have is capitalism, unregulated, large financialized capitalism. Yes, it allows us to do a lot of things, but if it's not democratically controlled, it sets out tremendous inequality and power domination, and that's a great stimulus to have more war. So if peace is to break out, we have to reorganize how we run our enterprises in a more democratic and, I would say, socialist manner.
Thank you, Tori. A wonderful lesson in history and how it all came about in terms of money becoming so valuable that armies needed to protect it. And when that kind of stuff happens, of course, as we know, Industrial Revolution came out of after wars. And these things are side effects which were unexpected. Industrial Revolution transformed how money became so important, and therefore going and raiding your opponent's ships and piracy. All these things came about because of the fact that money had become so crucial, and building wealth was great. Capitalism was fine, and everybody will do best if it's in their interest. That kind of thinking worked out, except it worked out too well. Rich became richer, and poor became poorer. Socialism and communism did not start off with the idea of diminishing people. It was an idea of trying to spread the wealth. It was an idea of making sure everybody has food on their table. So it started off by Marx, who was really a very rich person by his own rights, and yet he could see the disparities that was causing all the difficulties. I'm no scholar in that. Having said that, I know there was wonderful write-up by John Cummins. My goodness, this was artistically written. Thank you, John. Trauma, and how trauma affects people. And totally agree with you. And I see you got something else about Shakespeare. There's not good or evil. It's thinking that makes you so correct, so right. Trauma, when we talk about it, that's an internal thing. And they say, don't look for peace outside, look for peace inside. So often, peace is lacking inside. I meet another group occasionally, and last time I was there, this 65-year-old whispered and said, I don't say to too many people, but I was abused by my father. A shocking statement it was, but that's something he has been carrying on his back ever since he was a child, and he cannot let it go. So we need to find peace within before we can find peace outside. And I totally agree, trauma causes wars, and I'd read some books on the African Americans and generational trauma that they have to live with. Understood. I think Anudeep has a question, and shall we make that the last one, Ala? You're muted.
Yes, absolutely. Please, last question from Anudeep, and we're going to finish this brilliant presentation. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. It's so difficult because there is a wealth of knowledge being shared here. I'm making notes at the same time too, so that I can come back to what I was supposed to talk about or discuss, because I heard so many things here. Thank you so much. Once again, I'm just grateful to be a part of a group. Just wanted to mention that. I will not take up more time. I just wanted to touch upon a couple of topics with the basis the knowledge I had. So there was one thing about which stuck in my head, that was the things that are lost in translation. So I do want to mention about the Bhagavad Gita thing that was mentioned, that there is a specific book which is Bhagavad Gita as it is. I would recommend anyone who wants to read that, they should read that specific book, because many things are lost in translation. That the whole concept of this life is not being enough. A lot of religion does talk about there being another life out there, and that becomes like the grounds for people to do things in this life which they feel that it's not being judged, or they can do whatever they want, and they don't have that barrier. So I just wanted to mention that that's not like entirely true. So some of the translations will definitely help. And one of the thing I feel about fear is that is definitely a biggest obstacle to intellectual or spiritual growth. And that's one of the reasons I feel that most of the religion do cover or talk about taking fear off. And this was one of the thing I feel, that saying that you have another life or being evaluated is the way it has been kept. And one more discussion we did have about Buddhism. So just wanted to say that yes, Buddha himself always recommended that his statue or his photograph, or he should never be prayed. So there are two different philosophies of Buddhism which is still going on. And if you just read through that, you will realize that the other one, where the praying to Buddha is not required, that's the philosophy which is core value of Buddhism. And then there is another going on which is like praying, having his statue and considering him as God. So then again, like, these were the things which are lost in translation. And one more thing about the will, like the life itself being, is it fate, destiny, or free will? We had like just subtly touched upon the topic. So there is this brilliant book. It's just 30 pages, I guess. It's about the heading of the book is Who Am I? And it talks so much about the whole philosophy that I just wanted to share that. That's it. Like, these topics were closer to my heart. I wish there was, maybe it's an entirely different topic to discuss. So I don't want to spend more time on it, but just wanted to mention, that's all. Thank you so much. I'm grateful again to listen to all the views which was discussed here.
Thank you, Anudeep, for being here and making those wise comments. I appreciate it very much. Fate and destiny and karma, these are things that are very much entrenched in the Eastern religions, and we appreciate it. And also realizing that Buddha was certainly not a god. He didn't claim to be God. He said he's a human being who has now got greater wisdom. And the following, of course, certainly people are starting to call him a god, because they say anybody who's so self-realized is God. So ideally, we all are gods. God resides within all of us. So that was the answer to both Buddhism and Hinduism, saying that it all resides within. It's a question for you to discover it. With that said, thank you for the tips on the books, Anudeep, and do come back again. Maybe you might be able to be giving us a small talk if Allah considers it necessary. I appreciate you coming in.
Would love to. Thank you so much.
And with that said, should I pass it back to you, Allah, or Roman?
Yeah, I can say a little comment that I want to thank you for your peace in today's presentation and wisdom. And another comment I noticed for myself personally about gratitude. So let me express my gratitude to you for making this happen and this brilliant presentation. I hope everyone is here, and hopefully on YouTube who are gonna watch us get a little more piece of peace. Sorry for that, and wisdom and gratitude. And thank you everyone who could join our meeting today, and for your thoughts, for sharing your thoughts. And please, if you're on YouTube, make your comments, and someone wants to express more comments, go on YouTube, and we promise gonna respond to your comments. And thank you everyone, and thank you, Shishir, to you personally.